If you think there is no such thing as a stupid question, you have clearly never worked in customer service. We gathered 50 of the most mind-numbing, logic-defying things. Actual paying customers have looked another human being in the eye and asked. From metric yardsticks to wireless toasters, this is proof that common sense went extinct decades ago. 1. A grown man trying on a button-down shirt at a department store actually flagged down a teenage worker, pointed at his own reflections in a three-way mirror, and asked a completely genuine question. He wanted to know if buying the garment meant he got to take the other two guys home with him. The poor kid working for minimum wage had to gently explain that this mid-tier clothing franchise had not invented a portal to a cloning facility. Imagine thinking $39 buys you a personal squad of identical twins. What was his master plan? Starting a fiercely average barbershop quartet? 2. Dog grooming is a tough gig, but one owner took it to a completely different level of delusional. While watching the groomer carefully trim her tiny, highly anxious poodle, the lady leaned over the counter and casually requested a vocal cord adjustment. She literally asked if the groomer could just make the dog's bark a little less annoying, maybe drop the pitch down an octave or two. The clippers just froze in midair. Apparently, getting a summer cut now includes a complimentary sound engineering session. If groomers possessed the dark magic to make a poodle sound like Morgan Freeman, they would be millionaires. 3. You really have to wonder how some people survive their daily commute after hearing this one. Standing in a local bakery, a woman stared down a dozen glazed donuts like she was trying to crack a safe. Finally, she locked eyes with the baker and asked if eating the pastries in a perfect, uninterrupted circle would hypothetically make the calories cancel each other out. The baker's entire foundation of human biology just violently collapsed. It is truly terrifying that people walk among us believing pastry geometry is the ultimate diet hack. If that actually worked, my diet would consist entirely of deep-fried hula hoops. 4. Freelance photography is mostly just surviving unreasonable demands, but this client deserves a special award. She looked at her portrait proofs and confidently ordered the photographer to use his software to make her look about 20 pounds lighter, but without actually changing anything about how she visually looked. Read that again and let the stupidity simmer. She wanted to be digitally thinner in spirit, I guess? You cannot bend the fundamental laws of mass and space while aggressively keeping your double chin entirely intact. It is digital editing software, lady, not ancient witchcraft. The photographer probably just stared at his monitor until his eyes bled. 5. Over at the local post office, a lady slid a completely empty, unsealed glass jar across the counter like she was smuggling government secrets. When the profoundly confused clerk asked what on earth she was shipping, she proudly announced it was the exact smell of her grandmother's house. But wait, the punchline is absolutely lethal. She looked the postal worker dead in the eye and asked if postage was calculated by the sniff. How do you even begin to weigh an imaginary jar of emotional nostalgia? That employee definitely locked the front door, flipped the open sign to closed, and went home to question reality. 6. We are in serious trouble as a species. An adult college student walked up to the register at an art supply shop holding a standard tube of pure black acrylic paint. After intensely inspecting the label, he completely unironically asked the cashier if they carried this exact same black paint in a slightly lighter shade. Let the sheer absurdity of that request wash over you for a second. The concept of a bright black is literally called gray. It has been a highly documented color since the dawn of human eyeballs. I am deeply terrified of whatever this guy is attempting to paint. 7. Working at a neighborhood butcher shop means you handle raw meat all day, which makes this customer's question dangerously ridiculous. A guy bought 2 massive thick T-bone steaks for a weekend barbecue. As the butcher handed over the heavy paper package, the customer casually asked if the meat was pre-killed. What exactly was the alternative expectation here? Did he think the guy in the blood-stained apron was going to hand him a live, aggressively angry cow and wish him the best of luck? The butcher experienced a level of absolute exhaustion that a 10-year nap could never fix. 8. A waiter was casually clearing empty plates from a table after what looked like a perfectly normal, uneventful dinner service. Out of nowhere, the customer stopped him, put on a deadly serious face, and asked a legal-level question. He wanted to know, strictly for future reference, if the restaurant charged an extra hidden fee for the physical act of chewing. Honestly, how do you even respond to that without calling for medical backup? The server probably felt like he had just slipped into the Twilight Zone. No, sir, the mastication is entirely complimentary, but we are absolutely going to tax you for that question. 9. Holding a single, unpeeled yellow banana at the supermarket checkout line, a customer leaned in uncomfortably close and asked the teenage cashier with frantic concern if the fruit was completely gluten-free. The kid running the register, whose soul was already crushed by retail, just slowly scanned the item and muttered that, yeah, as far as he knew, it was safe. Common sense has apparently been entirely recalled by the manufacturer and discontinued. It is a piece of fruit grown on a tropical tree in the dirt, not a loaf of artisanal sourdough bread. The fact that this person legally drives a car is absolutely wild. 10. During a special three-dimensional screening of a classic dinosaur movie, a grown woman leaned over the dark aisle to aggressively whisper at a teenager holding a flashlight. She pointed at the giant computer-generated reptiles tearing apart a Jeep on screen and genuinely asked the usher if the dinosaurs were real. The kid, who makes minimum wage to sweep up sticky popcorn, was completely unprepared to become an impromptu paleontologist. He just stood there, seriously debating whether to break the news about the meteor that hit 65 million years ago, or just tell her they were highly trained actors in very expensive rubber suits. 11. A shopper at a massive discount warehouse was tightly gripping an aerosol can of room deodorizer like a weapon. They tracked down a worker, pointed out that the label specifically promised a fresh linen scent, and sincerely asked if spraying this chemical mist directly onto their dirty clothes meant they no longer had to use a washing machine. The employee just stared blankly, wondering if they should call the local health department. If masking the smell of 3-week-old sweat with synthetic lavender was the secret to modern hygiene, Maytag would have gone bankrupt in the 70s. Please just wash your filthy socks. 12. A frantic guy called a local florist with a highly specific, totally unhinged relationship emergency. He desperately needed a massive floral arrangement that clearly communicated a sincere apology for accidentally setting his girlfriend's kitchen on fire. But he did not stop at arson. He leaned into the phone and asked if the bouquet could also subtly demand the immediate return of his favorite toaster. The florist had to construct a centerpiece capable of successfully negotiating a domestic hostage situation. Nothing says I am deeply sorry for the fiery property damage quite like a dozen red roses and a passive-aggressive note about a kitchen appliance. 13. An eager couple was visiting a local pet supply shop, practically melting over a tiny, fluffy golden retriever puppy. The woman got completely teary-eyed, grabbed a nearby employee, and asked if they had any exact models in stock that would stay precisely this size forever. The worker, now officially thrust into the terrible role of the ultimate dream crusher, had to gently explain the relentless, unstoppable march of biological time. It is a living mammal, lady, not a collectible plush toy you buy at a theme park. They grow into 80-pound chaotic fur missiles, and no, you cannot pause their aging process. 14. Deep in the silent, dusty aisles of a public library, a college-aged kid walked up to the main information desk with a totally straight face. He leaned in and asked the librarian to physically point him toward the section of fiction books that were actually entirely true. The poor librarian's brain got caught in a paradox so massive that she temporarily forgot how the alphabet worked. That is literally a blatant oxymoron. The whole fundamental concept of the word fiction is that somebody completely made it up in their head. She probably just directed him to the nearest exit and told him to go outside. 15. Imagine the sheer, unbridled audacity of walking back into a bakery holding a completely empty cardboard cake box. A woman slammed it down in front of the manager, looked him dead in the eye, and complained that she had eaten the entire thing but really hated the vanilla flavor. Her brilliant solution? She wanted to exchange the non-existent ghost cake for a brand new chocolate one. You cannot return digested baked goods. This is not a magical video game universe where consumed calories are completely refundable. I am honestly shocked she didn't ask for raw cash back for the missing frosting. 16. At a local science and technology center, a tourist was utterly mesmerized by a water vapor and fan display, creating a miniature indoor tornado. She pulled the tour guide aside and confidently whispered that she understood how the machine worked, but she really needed to know exactly where the museum stored all that extra wind after they closed the building for the night. Did she honestly think there was a giant Tupperware container down in the basement just full of aggressive breezes? The guide just stared into the middle distance, aggressively questioning every life choice that led him to a career in public education. 17. A highly concerned pet owner was sitting in a veterinary clinic, complaining heavily about her incredibly loud dog. She looked the trained medical professional directly in the eyes and asked if, while he was doing the standard neutering surgery, he could also just go ahead and neuter the animal's bark. The poor doctor was suddenly plagued by a terrifying mental image of a completely silent dog opening its jaws while closed captioning magically appeared in the air. You cannot physically castrate an acoustic sound wave. It is a biological organism, not a broken stereo system you can just instantly mute with a remote control. 18. During a sophisticated afternoon at a beautiful countryside vineyard, a guest swirled her expensive glass of imported red wine, took a deeply dramatic sip, and asked the sommelier a burning question. She seriously wanted to know if drinking enough of this specific bottle would eventually cause her to naturally start speaking fluent French. The wine expert's years of intense culinary training completely vanished, replaced by the hilarious mental image of this suburban mom aggressively yelling at a baguette. The only language you are going to speak after downing 3 bottles of Cabernet is incoherent slurring, followed by a violently painful hangover. 19. Sitting in a mahogany-paneled office, a prospective client looked at a highly paid attorney and boldly pitched his master plan for endless financial freedom. He asked if legally changing his first name to the word cash would force commercial banks to automatically accept any check written out to cash as his own personal property. Every single law of modern economics and basic human identity screamed in absolute agony. If exploiting the global banking system was actually that incredibly simple, every petty criminal in the entire country would be standing in line at the courthouse legally changing their name by Tuesday afternoon. 20. Standing underneath a massive, towering Tyrannosaurus Rex skeleton at a natural history museum, a fully grown adult raised his hand to ask the head paleontologist a question. He stared up at the fossilized bones and earnestly asked if this specific predator was close personal friends with any of the other dead dinosaurs currently displayed in the neighboring rooms. The scientist, holding a doctorate in prehistoric biology, felt her soul quietly leave her physical body. They lived millions of years apart on entirely different continents. It was not a prehistoric high school cafeteria where the raptors and the stegosaurus all sat together sharing their snacks. 21. A middle-aged man was sitting comfortably in an optometrist's chair, testing out his brand-new prescription lenses. He looked around the bright exam room, turned to the doctor with wide, hopeful eyes, and asked if it was possible to add a special coating to the glass that would let him literally see directly into the future. This is a standard eye clinic in a suburban strip mall, buddy, not the ancient oracle of Delphi. If optometrists could manufacture clairvoyant eyewear, they definitely would not be spending their Tuesdays asking confused old people if lens number 1 or lens number 2 is slightly clearer. 22. Out in the middle of the pitch-black rolling ocean, an exhausted cruise ship passenger furiously flagged down a passing crew member in the hallway. He looked highly agitated, pointed out at the endless dark horizon, and demanded to know exactly what time the famous midnight buffet was scheduled to actually start. The employee just stared blankly as his internal concept of how standard clocks logically function shattered into a million tiny pieces. Take a really wild guess, man. Read the actual name of the food event out loud very slowly until the concept finally makes sense to your deeply broken brain. Mar 23. A guy in heavy work boots was wandering the aisles of a home improvement center holding a standard wooden yardstick. He squinted hard at the painted markings, tracked down a guy in an orange apron, and completely seriously asked if the store carried these exact same measuring sticks in metric yards. A metric yard is a blatant contradiction that entirely defies the basic laws of mathematical reality. You might as well march over to the plumbing department and aggressively demand a 5-gallon bucket completely filled with dehydrated water. The employee just pointed toward the exit and walked away. 24. A brand new member confidently walked onto the gym floor, grabbed a 5-pound dumbbell, and cornered a certified personal trainer. He genuinely wanted to know that if he strictly only did heavy bicep curls with his right arm, would his left arm eventually get incredibly jealous and just start gaining muscle mass on its own to compensate? Your limbs do not have entirely separate emotional complexes and toxic jealous rivalries. If phantom sympathy muscles were a real scientific phenomenon, absolutely nobody would ever do a single painful squat again. We would all just sit on the couch aggressively staring at our own legs. 25. Someone marched directly into a big box retailer holding a cheap plastic kitchen toaster and angrily demanded a full cash refund because the machine was completely dead. The tired customer service rep sighed heavily and politely asked if they had actually bothered to plug the cord into the wall socket. The customer immediately looked deeply offended and loudly argued that they fully assumed the appliance was totally wireless. Do you really think we are magically pulling massive amounts of electrical current directly from the local Wi-Fi router to aggressively heat up your morning Pop-Tarts? The sheer, blinding stupidity is actually breathtaking to witness. 26. A panicked lady standing at a drugstore photo printing machine desperately waved down a retail manager. She pointed eagerly at the digital screen, confirming she had successfully uploaded all her summer vacation pictures. Then, she held up her incredibly expensive smartphone and asked in a terrified whisper if her phone was now completely empty inside and if she immediately had to go take more photos to fill it back up. Does she seriously think digital images are physical liquids being actively drained out of her device with a tiny invisible straw? Modern technology has completely and utterly broken our collective minds. 27. Standing inside a rustic bait-and-tackle shop, a tourist held up a neon green, ridiculously overpriced plastic fishing lure. He stared down the grizzled old man working behind the register and aggressively asked if this specific piece of painted plastic came with a rock-solid, money-back guarantee to catch a fish. The old-timer just let out a raspy, nicotine-stained laugh, leaned over the counter, and told the guy that if a magic fish-catching device actually existed, he certainly would not be standing around earning $10 an hour selling it to tourists. It is called fishing, buddy, not guaranteed aquatic grocery shopping. 28. A highly nervous shopper at a suburban garden center was clutching a tiny, totally harmless packet of Venus flytrap seeds, like it was leaking radioactive waste. She locked eyes with an actual botanist and asked, completely horrified, if planting these little seeds in her living room meant the fully grown plant was going to eventually hunt down and eat her tabby cat. That is not just a profoundly dumb question. It is the exact plot of a terrible science fiction movie from the 1960s. It is a tiny houseplant the size of a golf ball, lady, not a bloodthirsty prehistoric monster waiting in the corner. 29. During the utterly chaotic morning rush at a trendy downtown cafe, a business guy in an expensive suit confidently ordered an iced caramel latte. But right before paying, he leaned over the stainless steel espresso machine and asked the barista if they could specially make his cold drink using hot ice instead. Hot ice is literally just room temperature water. It is called a puddle. You cannot physically hack the fundamental states of physical matter just because you are worried about getting a mild brain freeze on your way to a completely pointless corporate marketing meeting. The barista just wanted to cry. 30. Sitting comfortably in the driver's seat of a $60,000 luxury SUV, a potential buyer was aggressively testing out the dashboard navigation screen. He turned to the utterly exhausted car salesman and actually asked if the satellite GPS already secretly knew where he wanted to drive, or if he manually had to type the destination address in. Does this grown adult man think a standard crossover vehicle comes heavily equipped with a psychic motherboard? If cars could actually read our minds, they would definitely just drive themselves off a steep cliff to escape having to listen to our terrible singing voices all day long. 31. A massive regional furniture warehouse got a totally unhinged phone call on their corporate customer service hotline. A guy who had just purchased a king-sized mattress the previous week called in simply to verify if it was legally and structurally okay for him to sleep on the bed during the nighttime. What kind of heavily restricted bizarre furniture was this guy buying before? Did he honestly think soft mattresses had designated commercial business hours and automatically deactivated themselves right at sunset? The representative sitting in the isolated call center just stared at their plastic headset in absolute soul-crushing disbelief. 32. A late-night caller dialed into an absurdly expensive, totally unregulated telephone psychic hotline. The woman on the line spoke in a hushed, incredibly nervous whisper, claiming she had a deeply personal question but was way too embarrassed to ever say it out loud. After an agonizing, extremely expensive silence, she finally asked the psychic if she could just use her magical powers to instantly guess what the secret question was. You are paying $4 a solid minute for a scam artist to pretend to talk to ghosts. Lady, they absolutely cannot read your incredibly weird mind through a telephone wire. 33. Out on an incredibly loud, dusty construction site, a random passing pedestrian managed to wildly flag down a heavy machinery operator driving a 20-ton yellow bulldozer. Screaming over the deafening, rattling roar of the diesel engine, the guy pointed to a spot literally inches from the massive steel tracks and asked if the driver would be able to clearly see him if he stood right there. Why would you ever even want to physically test that theory? That is not a simple blind spot check. That is a fast track to becoming a flat human pancake in the middle of a freshly paved intersection. 34. A seasoned emergency dispatcher picked up a frantic 911 call in the absolute dead middle of the night. The man on the phone was whispering in sheer terror, claiming there was absolutely a massive monster hiding entirely underneath his bed. The operator, strictly following standard protocol for frightened children, gently asked for the caller's exact age. The guy sniffled loudly and replied that he was 32 years old, quickly following up to ask if that was statistically way too old to be afraid of the boogeyman. Absolutely nothing in the official crisis training manual prepared her for a grown millennial utterly terrified of imaginary closet goblins. 35. An extremely stressed bride-to-be was sitting directly across from her highly paid wedding coordinator, looking absolutely terrified about the fast-approaching reception timeline. She grabbed the planner's arm and asked a deeply concerning, totally unhinged legal question. She seriously wanted to know if, by ancient tradition, she was legally obligated to marry whichever random wedding guest ended up catching her tossed flower bouquet. That is definitely not how legal matrimony works. If it was, modern weddings would just be violently chaotic. High-stakes dodgeball tournaments where the grand prize winner automatically gets a spouse and half of your financial assets. 36. A constantly moving restaurant server had just gracefully finished a beautifully rehearsed monologue explaining the evening dinner specials. A middle-aged customer nodded thoughtfully, stroked his chin like a philosopher, and stated that while he fully understood the soup of the day, he urgently needed to know exactly what the soup of yesterday was. Did he honestly think the kitchen possessed a magical stainless steel time machine specifically calibrated for creamy tomato bisque? The server just smiled, politely explaining that yesterday's soup was currently resting peacefully at the bottom of the municipal dumpster out back. 37. A fully grown man in a tailored business suit was violently, aggressively wrestling with a heavy glass storefront door. The door was completely plastered with massive, bold, incredibly red letters screaming the word "pull." After 60 seconds of sweating heavily and aggressively shoving his entire body weight against the glass, he finally stopped, looked at a passing employee, and breathlessly asked if the building's main entrance was physically broken. It is a simple hinged door, buddy, not an impenetrable underground bank vault. How do these exact people manage to legally operate heavy motor vehicles without causing a massive national emergency? 38. Over at a brightly lit, outrageously expensive department store makeup counter, a wealthy woman was wildly gesturing at an enormous wall of liquid foundations. She looked straight down her nose at the trained cosmetic artist and aggressively demanded to know if they carried a highly specific shade that perfectly matched her inner personality. The artist had to physically restrain herself from enthusiastically handing the lady a giant bottle of chaotic, neon orange glitter glue. Unless your actual personality is legally classified as beige with slightly oily undertones, you are definitely shopping in the completely wrong section of the retail shopping mall. 39. A guy proudly strutted into a grimy, oil-stained automotive repair shop with the absolute unearned confidence of a seasoned pit crew mechanic. He loudly slammed his hands on the front counter and boldly demanded that the highly trained technicians immediately check his car's blinker fluid because he felt it was running dangerously low. For the absolute last time, vehicle turn signals operate entirely on electricity, not a magical glowing neon juice. The mechanic completely blue-screened, staring blankly at the wall. The only critical fluid currently leaking in this entire garage is this terribly misinformed customer's completely depleted brain power. 40. A very proud, totally confident elderly woman marched directly up to the main circulation desk of a massive county library. She loudly announced to the entire quiet room that she had finally successfully finished reading all their books. When the completely stunned librarian asked for clarification on reading tens of thousands of novels, the woman rolled her eyes in annoyance. She clarified that no, she hadn't physically read them all, but she just wanted the staff to quickly tell her exactly how the ultimate story ends. Ma'am, this is a giant public archive of human knowledge, not a single continuous television series. 41. A terribly aggressive lady furiously marched into a home improvement garden center and successfully bullied a completely exhausted teenage cashier into giving her a full cash refund for a totally dead, completely crispy fern. After greedily putting the money back in her purse, she held up the plastic pot entirely full of bone-dry soil and actually asked if she was legally allowed to keep the dirt. The mentally drained employee just stared blankly at her. He quietly whispered that yes, she was fully entitled to take that incredibly depressing bucket of absolute botanical failure all the way back to her suburban house. 42. Picture an incredibly furious woman aggressively storming past the front desk of a local police precinct, violently clutching a wet folder entirely full of ruined outdoor picnic photographs. She slammed the soggy evidence down directly in front of a heavily armed desk sergeant and loudly demanded to formally press criminal charges against the weather. She then aggressively asked exactly which judge she needed to legally speak to about officially acquiring a restraining order against the rain. You cannot legally handcuff a cumulonimbus cloud, Karen. The cop just stared intensely at his coffee mug, deeply praying for an immediate early retirement. 43. A woman was happily purchasing a beautifully detailed $90 desk globe for her husband's home office. Right as the cashier was successfully ringing up the barcode, the customer paused abruptly, scrutinized the cardboard box, and deadpan asked if the 12-inch plastic sphere was actually geographically drawn to scale. If a globe of the Earth was drawn to a completely accurate 1-to-1 scale, it would literally be the exact physical size of the actual massive planet we are currently standing on. Where exactly did she plan on securely parking a 24,000-mile-wide spherical map? Her suburban backyard must be absolutely enormous. 44. A guy was casually strolling through a massive wholesale warehouse club, aggressively grazing at the various food stations. He grabbed a tiny paper cup, totally swallowed a minuscule cube of cheddar cheese in one single bite, and then marched right up to the apron-wearing sample worker. Holding out the completely empty, heavily saliva-covered cup with a perfectly straight face, he firmly demanded a register price check on it. It is a completely free promotional sample of dairy, my guy, not a rare historical antique you are actively trying to appraise on a daytime television show. The worker just silently threw the cup in the trash. 45. A young teenager was completely drooling over a $2,000 electric guitar hanging prominently on the wall of a high-end music shop. He excitedly flagged down the sales clerk and seriously inquired if plugging the expensive instrument into a totally foreign wall outlet during an upcoming trip to Europe would automatically cause the guitar to start playing music with a thick British accent. Guitars do not have regional spoken dialects, buddy. It is a beautiful piece of carved wood with metal strings, not a foreign exchange student currently studying abroad. The clerk just pictured the guitar aggressively demanding hot tea. 46. A heavily confused homeowner was staring blankly at a high-tech smart thermostat display at a local hardware store. He quickly cornered a young employee and genuinely asked if precisely setting the digital dial exactly to 68 degrees would magically make his modern living room feel culturally and physically entirely like the year 1968. No, sir. It literally just activates your central air conditioning unit. It absolutely does not magically summon a massive outdoor music festival and a vintage painted Volkswagen bus directly into your hallway. The poor employee's brain immediately threw up a massive, unrecoverable technical error code. 47. The city's Public Works Department received a deeply irritated, incredibly aggressive phone call from a suburban resident complaining loudly about local road construction. The caller angrily pointed out that an entire massive crew was currently out front tearing up her street and aggressively demanded that they execute the heavy industrial paving process much more quietly because she was trying to peacefully work from home. Ma'am, they are literally operating a 20-ton diesel asphalt roller, not quietly knitting a tiny sweater inside a silent library. You absolutely cannot lay down 5,000 pounds of boiling tar with the physical volume entirely turned off. 48. A very hungry but incredibly paranoid man called up a local pizza joint to aggressively demand a large pepperoni delivery. When the teenager on the phone naturally asked for a standard home address, the guy completely refused to give it up. Instead, he angrily asked why the delivery boy couldn't just magically track him down using the secret GPS signal emitting from his personal cell phone. The high school kid working strictly for minimum wage just stared at the greasy telephone receiver, deeply wondering when exactly his job title was formally upgraded from a pizza maker to a covert intelligence operative. 49. An American tourist was standing right in the absolute middle of a highly busy London sidewalk, absolutely mesmerized by the massive towering clock face of Big Ben. She tapped a rushing, frustrated local on the shoulder and loudly asked if the massive metal hands on the clock were currently displaying the time in English, or if she desperately needed to pull out an app to mathematically convert it. It is literally numbers printed on a giant circle, lady. Numbers absolutely do not have a spoken accent. The British citizen just repeatedly blinked in absolute soul-crushing bewilderment at her insane question. 50. Right in the middle of an incredibly tense, completely breathtaking performance by a world-renowned symphony orchestra, a wealthy attendee aggressively waved down a theater usher. She leaned in and loudly whispered that while the classical music was absolutely lovely, she immediately needed him to run up to the stage and ask the entire first-chair violin section to seamlessly transition into playing Happy Birthday for her friend. The usher's lifelong, deep-rooted appreciation for highly sophisticated classical music just instantly died on the spot. He genuinely considered packing up his tailored tuxedo and running straight out the back emergency exit door. All right, I need to know right now. What is the absolute dumbest thing another adult has ever seriously asked you? Do not hold back, name and shame the stupidity in the comments below because I need to read these. If your brain hasn't completely melted yet, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you do not miss our next descent into madness.